Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Let us begin. In the history of the Church, one of the most blatant records of Christian warfare is the Crusades, a sequence of wars which began in 1095, ran by the Roman Church in the name of Christ against Muslim areas in the Near East during the Middle Ages. The First Crusade was an attempt to capture the Holy Lands back from the Muslim Turks. In this video, we will discuss the factors that contributed to the Christian Church's involvement in the Crusades. In order to do this, we will take into consideration these factors: the theology behind the Holy Wars, the Church organization's motives, and why individual members of the Church would choose to participate. Perhaps one of the most confusing questions for anybody studying the Crusades is this: how could the Church justify a war that would result in the death, some might say murder, of multitudes of people? Didn't Christ say to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you? Most early Christians refused to join the empire's army because they saw themselves as soldiers for Jesus Christ and not the emperor. As soldiers of Christ, they had a responsibility not to inflict harm on others. Christian views on war began to be tested once the Roman Empire became Christian. Although they were officially Christian, the empire continued to use war to defend their empire as well as to reach their political goals. This meant Christian theologians had to somehow find harmony between divine law and the duties of human government. Early Christian theologian Augustine defined a just war as being a war that would be waged for the protection of Christians and the defense of the homeland of the Christians. Although Augustine believed that there was such a thing as a just war, he still believed that even a just war involved sin, and participants were required to do some form of penance. The Church believed that it was a grave sin for Christians to kill a man in battle if it had been waged for secular ends. In 1066, Pope Alexander II authorised Duke William of Normandy by sending papal banners for his invasion of England. Although the battle was seemingly blessed by the Pope, the soldiers were still required to do some form of penance for the people they had killed. Over the next 30 years, the Church's view on a just war changed quite significantly. The Eastern Church requested the aid of the Pope to help them retrieve the Holy Lands from the Muslims. In the speech that inspired the Crusades, Pope Urban II endorsed the idea that the Church could participate in an offensive war. The Christians must retake the Holy City from the infidels. The Crusades went from being a just war to being a holy war and a service to God. Pope Urban II offered anyone who fought in the Crusades the same remission of sin that was granted to those who made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Christian theologians also began to misinterpret Augustine's views of a just war. They interpreted it to mean that there was nothing wrong with a soldier fighting in a war that had been authorized by the Pope. Crusade promoters began to preach that anyone who goes to Jerusalem to liberate the Church of God can substitute the journey for all penance. They made promises that once Christians regained the ownership of the current Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem would appear on earth, promising enormous rewards to all who had helped regain the holy city for Christ. So why did the Church want to be involved in the Crusades? Emperor Alexius of Byzantium and the Eastern Empire were at war with the Muslim Turks, as they attempted to regain their land. The East was succeeding in their mission, but were also unfortunately suffering great losses and no longer had the resources to continue fighting with the Muslims. Emperor Alexius sent a letter to Pope Urban II in 1095, pleading for him to help. Alexius used their common Christianity as a reason for the Pope to come to their aid by describing the extreme atrocities the Turkish soldiers had been doing to the captured Christians. The Pope responded positively to Alexius's plea for help, with many historians suggesting that liberating the Church of the East was not the only motives that Urban had in mind. Pope Urban II assembled a council in 1095 at Clermont, where he informed the audience that the Eastern Church had suffered greatly at the hands of a particularly virulent breed of infidel. Even Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies, had been desecrated by the heathen. The Holy Lands were under Muslim control. and the Christians in that area were being harassed by the Turks. The Christians could not sit around in the safety of the West while the Turks mocked their most sacred city. The main objective of the crusade was seen as the Western Church attempting to free the Holy Lands from the infidels. The Holy Lands were a place for pilgrims to seek forgiveness from God through their acts of penance. However, the current situation in the East meant that it was no longer safe for Christians to make the pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre. Urban had a responsibility to his church people to protect them from the tyranny of the Muslims, so he encouraged the people by uniting the practice of pilgrimage to Jerusalem and an armed defence and offence of her cities for the sake of God. The Western Church's participation in the Crusades can be seen as a strategically political move by the Pope. For years there had been a great split between the Eastern and Western churches, as each had different views on doctrinal and theological beliefs. The Eastern Church disagreed with the West views that the Pope had supremacy in spiritual affairs. Urban believed that the Crusades were a way of impressing the Church by showing the generosity and religious spirit of the West. The goal for the Western Church was that they could bring about the unity of the Western and Eastern Church under the banner of the Pope. Urban made it clear for each person that was present for his speech that it was a Christian's duty to participate in the Crusades. As Christians, they could no longer stand by and witness the death of their brothers and sisters in Christ. It was time to join the army of God and take the offensive against the enemies of their faith. After hearing such a motivational speech by Pope Urban II, the congregation shouted, "God wills it!" over and over again in an enthusiastic response. This chant confirmed for the church leaders that the people were on their side and willing to participate in the Crusades. The chant later became the battle cry used by every crusader. God wills it is seen as the defining motivation for the Crusades because it shows the Crusaders' belief that God wanted the Crusades to happen. Pope Urban II's speech struck a chord in the hearts of those who responded. An anonymous author who participated in the First Crusade wrote, "There was a great stirring throughout the whole region of Gaul, so that if anyone, with a pure heart and mind, seriously wanted to follow God and faithfully wished to bear the cross after him, he could make no delay in speedily taking the road to the Holy Sepulchre." There is no doubt that the people genuinely supported the Crusades, believing that they were the will of God. Risking their life in the Crusades and wearing a cross on their sleeves was seen as a way of fulfilling Jesus' will when he says, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." The Crusades was something that the Christians could do in order to show their faith. In doing this, the Crusaders saw themselves as becoming literal followers of Christ. Along with this heavenly promise of paradise came a worldly promise of land. Pope Urban II said, "Wrest that land from the wicked race and subject it to yourselves." The Christians were promised that the land they take from the Muslims could be kept for themselves. Urban did this by painting a picture of the Holy Land as the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. In doing this, Urban continued to confirm that the Crusades were God's will. The Christians also had personal religious aspirations of being close to the Holy Sepulchre. What's that, you might ask? It's the tomb where Christ was laid after his death. This might not seem like a big deal for us today, but for the people of the church in this time, they believed it was a rock worth crusading for. What makes this point even more interesting is that Christians had been pilgrimaging to the Holy Sepulchre and other sacred sites for many years before the First Crusade. During these pilgrimages, they had begun to carry weapons with them as precaution for self-defense. They eventually began to go on the offensive against the Muslims. Urban had declared to the people that it was no longer possible for them to make the pilgrimage to the Holy Land without weapons. The call for a holy war then affirmed some of the pilgrims' choice to take up weapons when pilgrimaging. Urban also offered Crusaders the same indulgences that were attached to the Holy Sepulchre. Journeying to the Holy Sepulchre was usually seen as a major ordeal because pilgrims who made the journey had often committed grave sins. The power of this promise is what led many to believe that participating in the Crusades would then mean total remission of all sin and a promise of eternity in paradise. This was particularly attractive for any crusader, as the individual could not help but think, that it was God's will to participate in the church's effort to take back the Holy Lands and free the churches of the East, while also freeing themselves from the sin that had bound them. There are many factors that contributed to the church's involvement in the Crusades. The gradual change in the theology of a just war, from being something that was considered murder to something that is considered God's will, is important in confirming that the Crusades could happen. The Eastern Empire's plea for help opened numerous possibilities for the Church. By participating in the Crusades, the Church believed that it would be possible to liberate the Holy Lands and protect the pilgrims from the Turks, while at the same time unifying the Eastern and Western Church together and sealing the Pope as the authority over all. The Church preached that it was a Christian's job to participate in the Crusades in order to show their faith in Jesus by destroying his enemies. The church leaders promised the Crusaders that by participating they would have land and total remission from all sin. The response of God wills it from the crowd affirmed that the church's people were on their side and willing to serve God in a battle against the infidels. When you think about it, it is a sincere difficulty for someone from the 21st century to view the Crusades. The idea of preserving Christianity or the Holy Lands through military exploit is tough to imagine or to back up from Scripture. It is important for us to remember that for almost all Christians of this time, they viewed the Crusades as God's will. The Crusades were a way for them to show their faith by going to war against the enemies of God's church.
I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. Ooh, I am for real. Never meant to make your daughter cry. I apologize 1,000,000,000 times. I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. Ooh, I am for real. Never meant to make your daughter cry. I apologize.